So next up, we're interested in talking about Activision and Microsoft. This is probably the biggest news in games over the last year or two. So Josh, give us a little bit of context. How would you articulate the strategy for Microsoft acquiring Activision, and sort of what are your key thoughts to unpack here?
Yeah, so first, I think it's phenomenal for the industry to kind of see this alignment, right? Microsoft has really been key at making a lot of strategic partnerships and kind of expanding their business lines. And Activision is definitely one of those bits. I mean, they just started reporting on them financially. And so the impact is there. There was a significant growth. 200 million users were added onto those bits. And there's about a 44%, year-over-year growth in hours played on the game. And it's had substantial impact on their ecosystem. And so I think overall, this alignment really, it's Microsoft's ambition to reach more gamers on more platforms, right? And so it's really indicating the strategic expansion and diversification of their portfolio. And I think it's really going to allow them to have, fuel to add to the fire to really kind of win on the gaming front. So it's super, super exciting. It doesn't come without potential issues, right? Because it does look like console has kind of saturated a little bit. So when you actually kind of dissect the numbers and do all the accounting, you actually see that, console's been declining and Activision's kind of making up the gap, and, all these types of things. So, there's some arguments where it's a net neutral effect, but I think overall it's a very, very positive indication for Microsoft.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. If Activision's going to land anywhere, might as well be Microsoft. They have a huge, huge investment in games overall. I think there's sort of two things that we can dig into here. I think is most interesting that's come up since you wrote this article is Microsoft's change in strategy in terms of how they're doing distribution. And so they've announced in the last couple of weeks that they are now, for the first time, going to move two of their Microsoft-only Xbox exclusive titles, blanking on the names. One of them was Pentiment, and the other one, I'm blanking on the name, but they're basically going to move them and to be distributed everywhere. And this is interesting because it's indicative of a strategy shift, where in the past, they had used their portfolio to drive Xbox sales. Now they're saying, hey, these games, we don't think there's a ton of incremental value on these games to drive people to Xbox. Instead, we're going to transition to a more traditional publisher and push these games out everywhere. Do either of you have thoughts about sort of what this strategy means for Microsoft overall and whether or not it's going to be successful?
We were talking earlier, I think, when we were in Netflix about just sort of like these eras of Netflix and transforming the core of the business. And my thoughts, and I'd love your take here, Josh, is that we're seeing Microsoft's gaming entity overall making very intentional moves away from being this kind of portfolio and specifically being a hardware business to being a content business first and foremost. Does that align with your assessment of the moves that Microsoft's gaming has been making, Josh, or what would you add here?
Yeah, certainly. It's definitely an expansion, right? So it's kind of really expanding the chain of customers and allowing wider distribution, larger user funnel, more adoption across products and platforms. It's definitely a way to kind of get high embeddedness across the larger ecosystem.
Doesn't it also indicate sort of a failure in their original strategy, right? Because what this basically means is they're basically saying, hey, we don't think Xbox is going to win, right? Because if you thought this was a lever you had to pull to get people onto Xbox, you wouldn't give away Xbox exclusives, right? That's your defensible mode. That means you get people on Xbox. And so it's sort of an admission by Microsoft and Xbox that, hey, listen, we actually don't think there's a long-term defensible advantage there. We need to sort of capitulate and we need to move on to a more ubiquitous ecosystem.
If we look at the history of consoles, like there's always been this war of console exclusives and like the battle for console exclusives. Yeah, to your questions, Andrew, of like, is this an admission of the strategy of like console exclusives and focusing on platform in the past? I mean, it's just sort of like, that's the way it's always been since like the initial console wars in gaming is like this war of hardware driven by exclusivity. And to me, I don't know if it's so much an admission of failure as just recognizing where the future of gaming is going. And as our devices become more interchangeable with each other and you can have similar experiences on your phone, on your desktop, on your TV, on your laptop, on your tablet, that the differential value of the device becomes less and less over time. And the value of the experience itself, or to put another way, the software or content, that becomes more important and is more about what it means to become like a massively successful gaming business. So to me, it's more an acknowledgement of like where gaming as a segment is going. What are your thoughts, Josh? Is this like an admission of failure of strategy for Xbox? Or is it more about like where the future of the industry is going, or both, or neither?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of both, right? You're absolutely right on the console war side. I think when you look at Activision, right, 200 million users coming your way is get the users, figure out how to engage them, right? seems where the strategy is going, right? And so similar to like social networks, you build a large audience, figure out how to monetize them, get a large audience, figure out how to kind of engage them. And they're going to do that through live services and systems, distribution and licensing and all this kind of stuff. And so I do expect that they're moving that way. And yeah, it could be an admission that, console funnel isn't there anymore. I mean, that's evident in some of their sales, but that also might be the age of the device. It's also kind of getting more expensive and more cost prohibitive to generate these like large console games and systems, and subscription services have not really panned out right now, for low quality games on console. So it could be just, a shift in consumer behavior, right? Where, console is just unfortunately hit in the face a little bit because of a shift in consumer preference. And so I think Microsoft is aware of that and they're compensating for it.
Right. What else would you like to call out from, the most recent moves from Microsoft, and specifically the repercussions that you expect to see in this first era post the Activision-Blizzard merger? What are you anticipating for big moves we might see from the new Microsoft gaming unit?
Yeah, a lot more digital content, a lot more focus on live services. I think that's going to be a shift in the dynamics there. That's going to give them some level of a competitive edge. You kind of keep their users. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Ultimately, like, we're gamers and we want to play great games and have good content. And I think, focusing on that as a team is what's going to get them to keep winning.
It's clear that like Microsoft is betting really big on Game Pass as a platform. What are your thoughts on the strategy on Game Pass as a product?
Yeah, I struggle with these products because like when I play a game, especially something on a console or something that I'm engaged with, I play with it at months at a time, right? So I spend my time on a particular game. Game Pass, while is interesting, like I'm really only going for like one particular thing. And so having a lot of congestion and options isn't necessarily like my style. And I think that tends to resonate, right? So you just get overloaded or you collect a bunch of things and never play them. Ultimately, I just want a game that I love. And if I'm willing to pay for it, I don't think you should cap users on, if they're willing to spend money or engage with the games. And so the subscription services and Game Pass, while it's, I think, a good idea, I think overall in how people engage with things, it just doesn't resonate.
I mean, that's really the question, isn't it? So you mentioned sort of like capping customer spending. Really what the bet that Microsoft is doing with Game Pass is it's a complete flattening of the LTV curve of their users, which I think that Game Pass, I've become just a straight Game Pass player. Like it's maybe once every other year that I invest in a game that's not on Game Pass. And that's flattened my LTV. What I would say for a user like me who skews a little bit older and I spend, a lower percentage of time console gaming than when I was younger, it's probably upped my LTV with them. But if you think about it versus maybe like 19-year-old me, where I was a more degenerate console gamer, it's probably flattened there. So I assume that they have some data that points that this is going to overall increase their average LTV, but that's a big assumption too. And it may also be more an experiment where they're in the process of learning how this compares versus like the historical user LTV. I do like that it normalizes my game budget, that I just know I'm spending this much a month on games and I can get my fill of anything on this.
Yeah, but you'd have to imagine like operating costs are only increasing, right?
Right.
So if you flatten the LTV curve, how does it make sense from a business standpoint, right?
They'll raise costs.
How does like the developers, down the line get impacted? And so I do think that it's a challenging business. And then are you just going to tick up the subscription price and the Game Pass price up every little bit, like, to kind of compensate for that cost structure? Like that's, to me, feels like a very, very risky business.
Well, so the answer is yes, right?
Is you need to continue to grow your user base, which may tie more to the strategy of unsiloing Xbox as a platform. If there's a future where Game Pass is available on more competitor devices and it's not seen as like an Xbox thing, that seems like, as we talk it through, that's the bet that they're planning with a lot of these moves.
Yeah, and ultimately distribution is king, right? And if you have one conversion point and that conversion point is kind of like declining in sales and volume and, has some shelf life to it, you're capping your potential upside, right? So expanding distribution, widening the funnel, and kind of, allowing people to kind of explore this tool in many different ways and manifest in different ways. High embeddedness plus subscription plus expanding user base is a way to unlock a lot of distribution and monetization and profit for the company. I'm excited to see what Satya does. I think he's one of the best CEOs in the game. And I think he has, been instrumental over the last 10 plus years to really do things right. And I'm expecting that game to really accelerate within that business.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Josh. It was really good to get your thoughts. You're someone I always enjoyed chatting with about kind of the state of the industry, the trick craft we both work in of games growth. And it's good to dig in today about what a few of the titans are doing that we're watching most closely in this era. Josh, is there anything you want to shout out here? I'll shout out one more time your blog, which I think is quite good, stoicmusings.xyz. Anything else you want to shout out that you're working on personally or that Carbonated is working on, or if people want to learn more what Carbonated is doing?
Yeah, so you can find Carbonated at carbonated.com. We are bringing Mad World to market, a general launch set for the summer of this year. And we're excited to share more as time goes by. So please follow us over on Carbonated. Personally, you can get me on LinkedIn, Jace Patel. Like you said, stoicmusings.xyz.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Josh. As always, the podcast was brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow. That means both providing the workforce cross-disciplinary around user acquisition, data science, and creative, but then also building software to automate and add prediction to key parts of the marketing workflow. So if you're scaling a game and could use some help doing that, we're happy to help you with that. You can reach us at upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Talk soon.
Awesome.